Welcome to the STEM.
Episode 1 of our STEM Expo speaker series. Our very first speaker, Dr. T.
Hey, Dr. T.
How's it going? Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. How are you?
Yeah, great.
The first STEM Expo virtual. How about that?
The very first in RHP history.
The new normal.
It's unfortunate it's taken the coronavirus, obviously, which is horrible, to do this, but these are great technologies we're actually working with. Hopefully this will be maybe a little something that we do in the future too.
Why not? Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah. All right.
So,
Mr. Pawlik, you want to start us off?
Sure, why not? Chemical engineering, Mr. T.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What is that?
So it means a lot of things. Actually, I think chemical engineering is one of the most versatile engineering careers you can follow, because it really touches a lot of different fields. Like as a chemical engineer, you can work in environmental fields, you can work in the food industry, you can work in manufacturing, you can work in research, you can work in academia. So there's a lot of things you can do as a chemical engineering. So it's almost a catch-all engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really.
Can you give us example how chemical engineering is in, let's say, food?
Sure. Well, basically, if you think of anything that's processed through an industrial process, anything you buy at the store, whether it's food or anything else really, that's not really raw out of nature, it has been processed in some way. It has gone through a chemical process, probably. So in any industry that manufactures pretty much anything, there's a chemical engineer behind that industry designing the process that goes from the raw material to the final product. So that applies to food, say candy or whatever processed food that you buy, there is an industrial process behind it. So that chemical engineer had to think, well, how do I turn these, I don't know, almond into this sneaker bar or whatever? And that, again, involves a scaled up, huge process to produce at an industrial mass scale. And there's a lot of equipment, instrumentation, chemical reactions involved in that process. And the person that thinks behind that process and designs the process is a chemical engineer.
Isn't processed food bad?
Well, I think that's a whole other discussion, but I don't know. I think, there's a lot of conflicting views on that. I'm more of an advocate of just trying to eat the food as not raw, but, with the least processing you can.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that processed food also solves a lot of problems in terms of mass production and feeding huge populations. So you can't have, organic, vegan diets for pretty much the whole planet. So processed foods also allow for that mass production and reaching, mass audiences. So, there's pros and cons, I guess.
When we look at, it was sort of a softball question, it wasn't a mean question. It was actually, if you think about it, processed foods, they can be extremely complicated to make them, healthy for you too.
Absolutely.
And the chemical engineer, they would be the ones that would be able to do that. So even for our students or for other people that would think, well, chemical engineering, but I only like nature. You could really help in that way, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, for example, my PhD was in environmental engineering. So as a chemical engineer, then you can specialize in a specific field of interest. And mine was environmental engineering, which is all about, improving and taking care of the environment, nature. Sure. So absolutely, there's just so many options.
So like Greenpeace has environmental engineers.
Yeah, probably. There's one or two for sure working. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, not just Greenpeace, but the water treatment plant in your city has a chemical engineer behind it,
Sure.
Figuring out how to turn those dirty, contaminated waters into drinking water, or to return that water back safely into the ocean, not contaminating the ocean. So So yeah, chemical engineers have a lot of weight in environmental processes and environmental care. Mhm.
Cool. That's
Great.
great. How did you first get involved in what turned you on to chemical engineering, or was it the chemical side, or was it the engineering side? And when you were just like 9, did you know that you wanted to be a chemical engineer?
No, no, not that young, but actually in high school, my favorite subject, of course, was chemistry. And
Okay.
that's what I really wanted to, that's when I started kind of investigating. Um, and by the end of high school, I had done some research and I found that, the best career path for me was one that allowed for me to do a lot of chemistry, but also to give me options rather than just focusing on maybe becoming a chemist who mostly would work in a lab or doing research. I just wanted to have variety of options and say, well, maybe because I was so young that I really didn't know exactly where I would end. I just knew that I liked chemistry. But following an engineering path, I knew that I would have different options after I finished my studies to specialize in whatever I wanted. So I kind of wanted to have kind of a parachute there to say, well, maybe later I like environmental and then I'll focus on that. Or maybe I like the food industry, I'll focus on that. Or maybe I like nanotechnology, I'll focus on that. So by following engineering, it gave me that umbrella of options later on that I wouldn't have had if I just focused on just being a chemist.
Okay. Do you think that's still important today, having those umbrellas?
Oh, more than ever, absolutely,
Hmm.
yeah.
Okay.
More and more, I think the whole global economy is shifting towards versatile people that can do that have a lot of different skills and that are very adaptable and flexible in their approaches. And I think engineering really builds those skills.
Hmm.
Um,
And I mean, that's the whole basis behind a STEM education, right?
exactly,
I
absolutely.
mean, to
Yeah,
have
being able
different
to, yeah,
skills and be fantastic in many, you know. I mean,
exactly. Yeah,
the idea of the Renaissance man is coming back, you know.
yeah, absolutely.
You're kind of our RHP Renaissance man, I might say. I think
Yeah,
that
definitely.
you're a lot of
I'm a
those are.
husky, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Along those lines, maybe you could give us a little brief background. So, how do we get from Argentina to
Oh,
teaching chemistry in your living room?
well, that's a
Yeah.
long story there.
Yeah.
So yeah, in Argentina, I finished high school and I was already set on following chemical engineering. So I joined a college at a university that specialized in engineering exclusively. So that's where I went from day one.
What school
And
was that?
it's called Buenos Aires Institute of Technology.
Uh-huh.
And it's an engineering school. And so they only teach engineering disciplines. And so I went there, and in Argentina, it's a 6-year career to become an engineer. It's kind of the equivalent of doing a master's here.
Right.
So I did 6 years of that. Um, Again, focusing on chemical engineering. I graduated, and then I started working for a company. It was a multinational oil and gas company called Saudi Aramco, which is huge. It's actually an American company, and and so my first job was in the oil industry, and I was in charge of designing their refinery train. It's basically how you go from the crude oil that you take from the ground to the final gasoline and refined products. And so that's what I did. I worked there for 2 years.
There's a job right down the hill from RHP for you, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I could have just come here for that. But actually, no, what was great, the experience was awesome, but it also helped me discover that it wasn't my thing because I really wasn't too
Right.
much. It was mostly an office job, so I was in the office a lot on the computer designing and simulating and modeling, which was fun, but to a certain extent, it wasn't my thing. I needed to be more out and interacting with people, and so that's when I decided by the end of it, that's when I decided to go on to pursue my PhD. So that's how I came to the US. And I also decided to go into the environmental route. So I decided to do my PhD in environmental engineering. I came to the US, I went to Michigan. That's where I did my PhD. And after that, I did a postdoc. A postdoc is kind of an extra 2 or 3 years that are solely focused on research. that you do after your doctorate. And I did that at Duke University. And after that, I worked for the government, for the US. So I moved to Washington, D.C., and I worked in nanotechnology because the focus of my PhD and my postdoc was applying nanotechnology to water treatment.
Mm.
And so, yeah, so after that, I worked for in Washington.
CIA.
Sorry?
CIA.
Well, it was a government, yeah, it was called Nist. It's the National
sure.
Institute, National
Yeah.
Institute of Standards and Technology,
Yeah,
which is
we know
kind
who
of
that
like,
is.
yeah, it's like it's the national lab that does all the engineering standards for the country. So
Wow.
whenever you buy, a tire, and that tire has to fulfill a certain standards,
Right.
those are set by Nist. So, but I was working on their nanotechnology division, and I worked there for, that was about 4 years total between the postdoc and working there. And that was great. So I focused on environment and the environmental impact of nanoparticles. So a lot of companies now are producing products that use nanoparticles in them. Like, for example, the sunscreen lotions that you use, they incorporate nanoparticles, titanium dioxide, silicon dioxide, and so on. And so what we were doing is setting the standards for how that should be done, because there are health implications to that, there are environmental implications to that, and nanoparticles are not as well researched as other materials. So companies were just using that without any sort of health or environmental studies behind them. So we were working on that. And I did that for 4 years. And as I was doing that, I started volunteering as a teacher for a nonprofit in Maryland called the Literacy Council. And I was helping kids that were coming, immigrant kids, that didn't know how to speak the language or needed help with their schoolwork. And I just loved it. I loved doing it. That's how I started, getting kind of in contact with teaching. And after a while, I loved it so much that I decided to go into a teacher preparation program, kind of like Teach for America. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, sure.
So I did that, and then I got my license, and I started teaching in DC. And well, one thing led to another, and then I switched to California, and here I am, still teaching chemistry.
Yeah, and Rolling Hills prep students have been thankful ever since.
I hope so. Yeah.
That's true. Now, are you going to another school
after this?
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go a little more international because my family is all abroad.
Sure.
And I really want to. I've been teaching for almost 9 years now, and I've been in the US for 15. So I wanted to kind of go back to my family. My parents have health issues, so I wanted to be closer to them. So what I'm going to be doing is probably teaching online.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think you've got some experience in that now, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
At least 4 weeks experience. Yeah.
Yeah. I would have preferred it to be in a different context, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Julian, you're actually pretty amazing. You've had so many years in school, and I think it's important for our viewers to see that, going all the way to your doctorate is, it's fantastic, but it also is above and beyond, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, not everyone needs to get their doctorate in engineering.
Absolutely.
However, yours is just fantastic. That's just,
yeah,
I didn't know
absolutely.
you were into nanotechnologies. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's a great field, very interesting. I try to instill everything that I've learned over the years in my classes too. So I try to communicate to the students, those environmental issues, nanotech, things like that. So while it's true that you don't need to have a PhD to go into teaching, I think that also trying different things is part of a journey. And it allowed me to also see what I liked, what I didn't like, eventually led me here. But yeah, I think that it's great that people just try different things until they find what matches.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so you are going to be are you going back to Buenos Aires?
I'm going to be first going to Costa Rica because my mom is there.
Okay.
And then Argentina.
Okay, so you're going to be moving around quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm going to be traveling for a while probably. That's why I wanted to go online.
Okay, and your future ideas? Do you have future ideas for
Oh,
where
I haven't
your
thought.
profession actually takes you?
No, frankly, I haven't thought beyond just, traveling for a while and just being with family. I
Okay.
think eventually probably I'll end up settling somewhere, maybe come back here. Um, but yeah, I haven't thought beyond the next couple of years.
But as you said, you have a lot of tools in your pocket,
Absolutely, yeah.
and your education and your pathways have really given you those tools.
Yeah,
So, that's fantastic, Mike.
yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's also one of the skills you get being an engineer, because you learn really how to delve in a lot of different fields. Like when you study chemical engineering, it's not just chemistry. You study math, you study physics, you study mechanics, electronics. We even had classes in business and economics and marketing as part of the engineering program. So I think that taking that program allowed me to have all these different skills that I can apply to different things. So I think that's another advantage of like going into engineering.
Excellent.
How has the bike riding been going during this quarantine?
It's been pretty good because the streets are empty.
Oh, really?
There's very little traffic. I go groceries on my bike. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a Target nearby, so I take my backpack and I just go on my bike just to stay active.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's actually pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. T, do you have any last words, last advice for some of our students, and why they should go into chemical engineering, or any other words of wisdom from the doctor?
I think a more general advice would be to not be afraid of change throughout your journey. I've been through a lot of changes, and I think that sometimes someone might think that if you start a certain pathway, you have to finish it or you have to just keep on it until the end. But I think it's okay to realize that, as you go through the journey, you may discover things about yourself that you enjoy or not, and that it's okay to take a turn if you have to. I started working in the oil industry, then I went into PhD research, then I moved into teaching, and that's all good. I think that that's part of everyone's journey. So I think that it would be great for anyone to think that it's okay if a change is needed midway, it's okay to take it, and
Excellent.
that's
Great.
part of the
Great
journey.
advice. Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough for spending this time with us and being our first guest on
Yeah.
My pleasure. My
the
pleasure. Thank you so much.
virtual.
Yeah.
Um,
Before you go, Dr. T, do you have anything you want to plug? Any upcoming labs or anything like that?
And labs,
Get your name out
unfortunately,
there.
not doing labs at the moment.
And,
But
and for all you listeners out there and viewers, you can catch Dr. T every Monday through Friday online at Rolling
absolutely,
Hills Prep now through June. So
yeah. Or send me an email.
yeah.
If you want a one-on-one, if you have any questions about engineering, just send me an email and we can schedule an interview.
All right. Sounds
Okay.
great.
excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.